The auction sold every daughter except the one with dark skin, and she stood alone under the unforgiving Nevada sun while men turned their faces away like she carried plague. Serafina Blackwood pressed her spine straight against the shame that wanted to bend her double. The wooden platform burned through her worn boots. Sweat traced lines down her neck, but she would not wipe it away. Would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The auctioneer's voice had grown hoarse, calling for bids that never came. His hammer trembled in his grip. Around the town square, men shuffled their feet and studied the ground like it held secrets worth knowing. She had watched the others go. Sarah, the baker's daughter from Missouri, claimed by the blacksmith. Mary, barely 16, taken by the ranch foreman who promised her father's debts would disappear with her. One by one, they stepped down from this cursed block into lives that might be kind or cruel, but at least were lives. The sheriff moved closer, iron shackles catching sunlight. Protocol demanded unclaimed vagrants be sent to territorial prison. The town council had made their rules clear when they decided auction was the only solution to Cornelius Wade's sudden death and the cargo of women he left behind. Heat shimmered off the dusty street. A child's voice cut through the silence. "Papa, why won't anyone help her?" Seraphine's eyes found the source. A small girl with dark braids tugged at a man's sleeve. He stood apart from the crowd, weathered hands resting on his daughter's shoulders. Something in his face was different from the others. No shame, no disgust. Just a steady gaze that held hers without flinching. The sheriff's boots scraped against the platform edge. "I'll take her." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Ripples of whispered shock spread through the crowd. The man stepped forward, his daughter's hand clasped in his. Seraphine's heart hammered against her ribs. Another trap, perhaps. Another form of cage. But the shackles in the sheriff's hands promised worse. The auctioneer's relief was audible. "Ezekiel Thornfield bids for the woman." "Any other offers?" Silence answered him. "Sold to Mr. Thornfield." The words fell like a judge's gavel. Serafina stepped down from the platform on legs that wanted to buckle. The crowd parted as she approached the man who had claimed her. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. His daughter peered at her with curious eyes that held no fear. "Ma'am," Ezekiel touched the brim of his hat. "I'm Zeke. This is Meadowlark." The child waved. Serafina managed a nod. Her voice caught somewhere between her chest and throat. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming in hushed tones. She caught fragments as they passed. Speculation about Zeke's motives. Predictions about how long this arrangement would last. Bets on whether he'd bring her back to town within the week. "We'll head home now," Zeke said. "It's a fair ride up the mountain." He led them to a wagon hitched with 2 sturdy horses. Helped her onto the bench beside him without asking permission to touch her arm. His hands were careful, respectful. Meadowlark scrambled into the back, chattering about the animals they might see on the way home. The wagon rolled through Copper Ridge's single main street. Store owners watched from their doorways. Women pulled their children closer as they passed. Serafina felt their stares like brands against her skin. "They'll talk," she said finally. "Let them." Zeke's voice carried no anger, no defensiveness. Just acceptance of a burden he seemed willing to bear. The wagon wheels found their rhythm on the mountain road, carrying them away from the town's judgment. Pine trees closed around them as they climbed. The air grew cooler, cleaner. Meadowlark's chatter filled the spaces between hoofbeats and creaking leather. She spoke of her garden, her pet rabbit, the books her papa read to her each night. Normal things, family things. Serafina watched the landscape change from desert scrub to forest green. Each turn in the road took them further from the auction block, from the eyes that had judged her unworthy. But closer to what? Another kind of prison? A different form of ownership? The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a dream. Logs fitted tight against mountain winters, smoke curling from the chimney, a garden plot showing the first green shoots of spring vegetables. It looked like home in a way that made her chest ache. Zeke helped her down from the wagon. Meadowlark ran ahead to show her the rabbit hutch, the chicken coop, the creek that provided their water. The child's enthusiasm was infectious, genuine. No practice performance for her father's benefit. "I'll show you the house," Zeke said. The interior was clean, simple, comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Handmade furniture spoke of careful craftsmanship. Books lined a shelf near the window. Not the home of a man who bought women at auction for cruel purposes. "You'll have your own room," he said, opening a door off the main living space. "Privacy when you need it." The room was small but adequate. A bed with clean quilts, a washstand, a window that looked out over the valley. Better than anything she'd known since leaving her childhood home years ago. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Zeke turned. From the window, his expression unreadable. "Everyone deserves better than what happened to you today." Not a complete answer. Something moved behind his eyes, some deeper truth he wasn't ready to share. Serafina filed it away. In her experience, men always had hidden motives. The trick was discovering them before they became dangerous. Meadowlark called from the main room, eager to show off her collection of smooth river stones. Serafina followed the sound, leaving her questions unasked for now. The child's innocence was a balm against the day's cruelties. Her acceptance of Seraphine's presence felt like a small miracle. No judgment, no fear. Just a lonely child happy to have another person in her world. But as the afternoon wore on, Seraphine's eyes cataloged details. Maps spread across Zeke's desk. Documents with official seals tucked hastily into drawers. Books that spoke of legal knowledge beyond what a simple prospector might need. Ezekiel Thornfield had secrets. The question was whether those secrets would save her or destroy her. Night fell over the mountain, bringing with it the sounds of wild country. Coyotes calling across the valley, wind through the pines. The crackle of logs in the fireplace as they settled into an evening routine that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. Serafina helped Meadowlark with her letters while Zeke prepared their supper. Simple domestic tasks that felt like play acting. They were strangers performing the role of family, each carrying their own hidden truths. But for now, it was enough to be warm, fed, and safe from the judgment of Copper Ridge. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own revelations. Tonight, she was simply grateful to be off the auction block and in a place where a child's laughter filled the spaces between heartbeats. 3 days passed before Zeke suggested marriage. The words fell between them at breakfast while Meadowlark gathered eggs from the henhouse. Steam rose from their coffee cups in the morning chill. Seraphine's spoon scraped against the bowl, the only sound besides wind through the pines. "For protection," he added when she didn't respond. "Legal standing. So they can't take you back." Her hands stilled. The porridge grew cold while she studied his face for deception. Found none, but that meant nothing. Men learn to hide their intentions well. "What do you get from it?" Zeke's fingers traced the rim of his cup. "Help with Meadowlark, someone who can read and write. Company that isn't an 8-year-old's chatter. Practical reasons. Honest ones, maybe, but his eyes held depths she couldn't fathom. "I need to think," he nodded, rose from the table without pressing. Left her alone with her doubts and the growing certainty that staying unmarried left her vulnerable to anyone who might challenge Zeke's claim. The door to his study stood ajar. Serafina found herself drawn to it that afternoon while Meadowlark napped and Zeke worked his claim deeper in the mountains. Sunlight slanted through dusty air, illuminating papers scattered across his desk. Not mining documents. Surveyor maps marked with locations she didn't recognize. Legal papers bearing territorial seals. Letters addressed to men whose names meant nothing to her, but whose titles suggested authority beyond this remote valley. Her pulse quickened. She lifted the edge of one document, revealing correspondence about missing women, trafficking routes, a network that stretched across 3 territories. Footsteps on the porch froze her blood. Serafina stepped back from the desk as Mita Lark's voice carried through the cabin. The child was awake, calling for her papa. Serafina smoothed her skirts and moved to the kitchen, heart hammering against her ribs. Questions burned in her throat through dinner. She served rabbit stew and cornbread while studying Zeke's weathered hands, the careful way he watched the windows, how he always sat facing the door. After Mita Lark fell asleep, they sat by the fire. Serafina mended a torn shirt while Zeke cleaned his rifle with methodical precision. The familiar motions of domestic evening, but tension stretched between them tight as wire. "You're not just a prospector." The words escaped before she could cage them. Zeke's hands stilled on the rifle barrel. "What makes you say that?" "The papers in your study. Letters from territorial officials. Maps that have nothing to do with silver claims." He set the rifle aside. Stared into the flames for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Some things are better left unknown. Not when they affect my life," the fire crackled. Wind howled down from the peaks, rattling windows and setting the walls to creaking. Winter wasn't finished with the mountains. Despite spring's tentative arrival in the valley, Cornelius Wade wasn't just a merchant. Zeke's voice was quiet, measured, each word chosen with care. He moved cargo that shouldn't be moved, people who didn't choose to travel. "I've been tracking his operation for 2 years. Seraphine's needlework lay forgotten in her lap. The shirt's torn sleeve gaped like an open wound. "That's why you were at the auction. Part of it. And the rest?" Silence stretched between them. Zeke's jaw worked as if chewing words he couldn't swallow or spit out. "Mita Lark needs stability. Someone who can teach her things I can't. Someone who understands what it means to be different in a world that doesn't make room for different." Truth and evasion woven together. Serafina felt the pattern of it, the way he gave her pieces while holding back the whole. "What aren't you telling me?" His eyes found hers across the firelight. Something raw flickered there, quickly hidden. "More than you need to know, more than I should tell anyone." She folded the mending, set it aside, rose from her chair and crossed to the window where moonlight painted the valley silver. "You want me to marry you, bind my life to yours. But you won't trust me with the truth of what that means. Trust is earned. So is marriage." The words hung between them like smoke. Serafina pressed her palms against the cold glass. Outside, night pressed close around the cabin. No lights in the valley below. No neighbors within shouting distance. Just wilderness and whatever secrets Zeke carried in his careful silences. "I'll do it," she said finally, "for the protection it offers. But don't mistake convenience for something more." Relief flickered across his features. "I wouldn't presume to." But his eyes lingered on her face in the lamplight, and she wondered if presumption was exactly what lived in the space between his words. The ceremony took place 4 days later in the cabin's main room. Dr. Helena Morse served as witness, the only person in Copper Ridge willing to associate with their arrangement. She was a stern woman with capable hands and eyes that missed nothing. Mita Lark picked wildflowers for Seraphine's hair. The child's excitement was genuine, untainted by the adult's complicated motives. She chattered about having a real mama now, someone to teach her piano and French and all the things ladies needed to know. Seraphine's throat tightened. The child's trust felt like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. The vows were simple, practical. Legal words that bound them without reference to love or honor or cherishing. A contract spoken over a Bible, while wind rattled the windows and shadows danced on the walls. When it was done, Dr. Morse shook their hands with dry efficiency. "You'll need to register the marriage in town," she said. "Make it official with the territorial clerk." The thought of returning to Copper Ridge, of facing the stares and whispers, made Seraphine's stomach clench. But legal protection required. "Legal documentation. We'll go tomorrow," Zeke said. That night, Seraphina lay in her narrow bed listening to the house settle around her. Married now, but still alone. Still carrying questions that grew heavier with each passing hour. Through the thin walls, she heard Meadowlark talking to herself in the drowsy way children do before sleep truly takes them. The child was recounting her day, telling her stuffed rabbit about the wedding, about how Papa had been planning this for a long time, and now they were a real family. Planning for a long time. The words echoed in Seraphine's mind. How long had Zeke been watching Wade's operation? How long had he known about the women being trafficked? Had he known she would be there that day, standing alone on the auction block? Sleep eluded her until the small hours. When it finally came, her dreams were filled with maps and shadows, with the feeling of being watched by eyes she couldn't see. Morning brought coffee and fried eggs, and Meadowlark's cheerful chatter about their trip to town. The child seemed unaware of the tension between the adults, or perhaps she chose to ignore it in the way children do when acknowledging adult problems would make their world less safe. The ride to Copper Ridge stretched long and quiet. Zeke handled the reins with steady hands while Seraphina watched the landscape roll past. Spring was winning its battle against winter here in the lower elevations. Green shoots pushed through. Melting snow. Streams ran high and fast with runoff. New life emerging from frozen ground. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. The town clerk's office smelled of dust and bureaucracy. Forms were filled out in careful script. Fees were paid. A stamp. Pressed. Their union into official existence. Word spread quickly in a town the size of Copper Ridge. By the time they finished their business, small crowds gathered at windows and doorways, watching, judging, whispering behind cupped hands. Seraphina kept her spine straight and her eyes forward, let them look. She had survived worse than their disapproval. But as they prepared to leave town, a man approached their wagon. Well-dressed, soft-handed, with the smooth manner of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Zeke Thornfield," he said, touching his hat brim. "Aldrich Crane, Town Council." Zeke's hands tightened on the reins. "Mr. Crane. Heard about your recent marriage. Congratulations." Crane's smile never reached his eyes. "Might I have a word? Privately?" "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my wife." The words carried weight Seraphina felt, but didn't understand. Crane's smile faltered for a moment before reforming. "Of course. Just wanted to mention that some folks are concerned about your situation, complications that might arise. There are people willing to help should you decide this arrangement isn't working out." Threat wrapped in politeness. Warning disguised as concern. "Much obliged," Zeke said. "But we're managing fine." Crane stepped back from the wagon. "Of course you are. Just remember, help is available if you need it. For any complications that might develop." He touched his hat again and walked away. But Seraphina felt his attention like a hand between her shoulder blades. The ride home passed in silence, broken only by Meadowlark's observations about birds and flowers and clouds that looked like animals. Child's chatter that couldn't quite masked the tension radiating from her father. As they climbed toward their valley, Seraphina found her voice. What kind of complications was he talking about? Zeke's jaw worked. The kind that come from asking too many questions in a place where questions aren't welcome. Another non-answer. Another piece of the puzzle held just out of reach. That evening, as they settled into their routine of supper and mending and Meadowlark's bedtime story, Seraphina made a decision. Marriage might be a convenience, but survival required knowledge. She would find out what Ezekiel Thornfield was hiding, even if it meant discovering truths that might destroy the fragile safety she'd found in his mountain cabin. The fire burned low as she made her plans, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like secrets given form. Truth carved itself from lies the way spring carved rivers from frozen mountainsides. Serafina waited 3 days after their trip to town before she opened her mouth and let the words spill like water through a broken dam. Zeke was cleaning his boots by the fire while Meadowlark slept, the domestic quiet that had become their evening ritual. I kept Cornelius Wade's books. The boot brush stilled in his hands. Firelight played across his face, revealing nothing and everything. I recorded every transaction, every location, every woman who passed through his operation. Her voice stayed level, matter of fact. He made me do it after he caught me trying to escape the first time. Said if I ran again, he'd kill the next girl who tried to help me. Zeke set the boots aside. His hands moved to his knees, gripping them until his knuckles went white. You weren't a victim at that auction. You were evidence. I was both. The fire crackled between them. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like water over stone. Spring melt rushing down from peaks where winter still held court. How much do you remember? All of it. The words tasted like ash. Names, places, routes, payments. Wade thought keeping it in my head instead of on paper would be safer. He was wrong about many things, but not that. Zeke leaned forward. The careful mask he wore around her began to crack. There are others still trapped in the network. Dozens. Maybe more. Seraphine's hands found each other in her lap, fingers intertwining. He had partners. Men with money and influence who provided protection in exchange for their pick of merchandise. The word left a bitter taste. Merchandise. As if human souls could be weighed and priced and sold. I know about Magnus Webb. Zeke's head snapped up. How? Wade mentioned him often. The man with the ranch who funded their operations. The one who made problems disappear when local law enforcement got too curious. Silence stretched between them. Zeke rose from his chair and moved to the window, staring out at darkness broken only by starlight. His shoulders carried tension that spoke of burdens too heavy for one man. My wife discovered Webb's connection to Wade. The words dropped into the quiet room like stones into deep water. Serafina felt their weight, their implication. What happened to her? Writing accident. At least, that's what the coroner's report said. His voice went flat, empty. Horse spooked on a mountain trail. She fell, broke her neck. But his tone suggested accidents and truth were different creatures entirely. Webb had her killed. I can't prove it. Yet. Zeke turned back to her. But I will. The promise hung between them, solid as iron. Serafina saw the grief in his eyes, the rage he kept banked beneath careful control. A man who had married her not just for convenience or Meadowlark's sake, but because she carried the key to his wife's justice. Is that why you saved me? For what I know. At first. His honesty cut cleaner than deception would have. But not. Now, what changed? He moved back to his chair, but didn't sit. Instead, he stood with one hand on its back, studying her face in the firelight. You did, the way you are with Meadowlark. The way you've made this place feel like home instead of just a shelter. The way you asked me to dance last Sunday when she was playing that old fiddle tune, even though we both know you were just trying to make her smile. Memory flickered between them. Serafina spinning in the cabin's main room while Meadowlark's uncertain bow work filled the air with something that might have been music. Zeke taking her hand, moving with surprising grace for such a large man. The moment when their eyes met and something shifted, became real instead of performed. Dancing doesn't make us partners. No, but wanting the same justice might. Serafina considered this. Weighed his words against the careful way he'd watched her these past weeks. The gradual softening in his manner, the moments when his guard dropped and she glimpsed the man beneath the mission. Webb will come for me eventually. When he realizes what I represent, I know. And Meadowlark? He won't hesitate to use her as leverage. Zeke's jaw tightened. That's why we need to move first. Though we landed between them like a bridge built of necessity and something deeper. Partnership forged in shared purpose, tempered by growing trust. What are you proposing? We use what you know to map the remaining network. Identify the women still trapped. Build a case the territorial marshals can't ignore. His eyes met hers. We finish what my wife started. Serafina felt the weight of the dead woman's legacy, the expectation that she would step into another's shoes and walk another's path. But this felt different from being bought at auction or married for convenience. This felt like choosing her own direction for the first time in years. There's something else you should know. Zeke waited. Aldrich Crane, the man who approached us in town. He was one of Wade's customers. The fire seemed to dim in the suddenly charged air. Zeke's hand tightened on the chair back until the wood creaked. You're certain? I recorded the payments. Myself. Monthly installments for what Wade called premium services. Crane liked young ones. Scared ones. Her voice stayed steady despite the memories that tried to claw their way to the surface. He's probably wondering how much I remember about his preferences. That's why he offered to help with complications. He wants me gone before I become a problem. Zeke moved to the fireplace, gripped the mantle with both hands, and stared into the flames. The logs collapsed in a shower of sparks, sending shadows dancing across the walls. How long before Webb realizes what you represent? Wade kept careful records of his business associates. If Webb has access to those files, he already knows I was more than just another woman at auction. Serafina rose from her chair, moved to stand beside him at the fire. We might have days. We might have hours. Then we start tonight. He turned to face her. The careful distance they'd maintained since their marriage dissolved in the face of shared danger. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Are you ready for this? Really ready? Once we begin, there's no going back to the quiet life. Serafina thought of the women still trapped in Webb's network, young faces marked by fear and hopelessness. The sound of auction blocks and rattling chains and men who bought human souls with casual cruelty. I was never meant for quiet. They spent the rest of the night in his study, spreading maps across the desk and floor. Seraphine's memory provided the framework while Zeke's investigation filled in details. Names, locations, routes, connections. A web of corruption that stretched across 3 territories. By dawn, they had identified 17 sites where women might still be held. A dozen men who profited from human cargo. 5 officials who provided protection in exchange for silence or payment. The scope of it staggered even Serafina, who had lived within its shadow for 2 years. We'll need help, Zeke said as pale light crept through the windows. People we can trust. Do such people exist? Dr. Morse, for one. She's been treating girls who escape from Webb's operation. Never asks questions, never reports anything, just provides care and helps them disappear to safer places. Anyone else? My cousin Samuel runs a way station 50 miles north. Cherokee territory, outside Webb's normal reach. He's helped people before. A network to fight a network. Light to balance. Darkness. Meadowlark's voice carried from her bedroom, the sleepy sounds of a child waking to a world she still believed was safe. Soon she would come looking for breakfast and morning hugs, and the small rituals that made their cabin feel like home. We protect her, Serafina said. Whatever else happens, we keep her out of this. Agreed. But they both knew children rarely stayed protected when the adult world turned dangerous. The question wasn't whether Meadowlark would be touched by what was coming, but whether they could keep her safe when the storm finally broke. Zeke began gathering the maps and documents. Evidence of their new partnership, their shared commitment to justice and survival. "Are you sorry?" he asked as they worked. "About any of this?" Serafina considered the question. 3 weeks ago, she had stood on an auction block believing her life was over. Now she sat in a mountain cabin planning to take down a trafficking network that stretched across half the territory. "Ask me again when it's finished." But as she helped him store their plans in the hidden compartment behind his desk, she realized something had shifted in the night. The marriage of convenience was becoming something else entirely. A partnership built on truth instead of evasion, trust instead of suspicion, common purpose instead of separate survival. It might not be love, but it was the foundation on which love could grow if they lived long enough to tend it. Outside, the sun climbed over the peaks, painting the valley gold with new light. A new day beginning, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. The journal lay hidden beneath loose floorboards in what had been their bedroom. Serafina found it while searching for winter blankets to store away, her fingers catching on the edge of wood that didn't sit flush with the rest. Curiosity drove her to pry up the board, revealing a space hollowed out with careful precision. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a leather-bound book filled with a woman's careful script. The first entry was dated 3 years past. Margaret Thornfield's investigation into missing women had begun long before Wade's operation reached Copper Ridge. Her handwriting was precise, methodical, tracking patterns and connections with the dedication of someone who understood that details meant the difference between justice and failure. But it was the final entries that stopped Seraphine's breath. Margaret had discovered webs. Ranch had documented the holding areas, the schedule of transfers, the names of men who came to make their selections. She had been preparing to contact territorial authorities when the entry stopped abruptly. The last line, written in hurried script, sent ice through Seraphine's veins. "He knows. Taking Meadowlark to Samuel's until this is finished. If something happens to me, give this to Zeke. Tell him the truth about what we found." 3 days later, Margaret Thornfield was dead. Serafina sat on the bedroom floor, journal clutched against her chest, as understanding crashed over her like spring avalanche. She was not the first woman to sit in this cabin, to eat at that table, to help Meadowlark with her letters. She was not the first to fall into partnership with Ezekiel Thornfield. She was the replacement. Footsteps on the porch announced Zeke's return from town. Serafina heard him call her name, heard Meadowlark's excited chatter about the ribbons. He'd brought her the hard candy that would last until next week if she was careful. Normal sounds, family sounds, built on a foundation she hadn't known existed. She found her voice when he appeared in the bedroom doorway. "You never told me she was investigating Wade's network." Zeke's eyes found the journal in her hands. His face went still as stone. "You didn't tell me she was doing exactly what I'm doing now. Gathering evidence, documenting connections, preparing to bring down the same network." Silence stretched between them. Through the window, afternoon light painted the mountains gold and amber, beautiful country that held ugly secrets. "She was better at it than me," he said finally. "Smarter, more careful. She knew how to ask questions without raising suspicion. Like me, like you." The admission hung in the air between them. Serafina felt the weight of it, the implications that reached back to the auction block and forward to whatever future they might build. "When you saw me standing there, alone and unclaimed, what did you think?" Zeke leaned against the doorframe. His hands found his pockets, a gesture she now recognized as his retreat from difficult truths. "I thought Margaret was getting a second chance." The honesty cut deeper than any lie could have. Serafina set the journal aside and rose from the floor, brushing dust from her skirts with hands that wanted to shake. "And now? What do you think now?" "I don't know." 3 words that carried the weight of confusion, guilt, and something else she couldn't name. Serafina moved to the window, pressing her palms against glass warmed by afternoon sun. Did you love her? Yes, do you love me? The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When his voice came, it was barely above a whisper. I thought I did. I thought what I felt for you was real, separate from what I felt for her. But finding that journal, seeing her words again, I don't know where Margaret ends and you begin in my mind. Truth like broken glass. Sharp enough to cut, impossible to handle without bleeding. I won't be her ghost. Serafina turned from the window to face him. Zeke's expression held pain she recognized from her own mirror, the look of someone trying to love the living while carrying the dead. I won't be the woman who finishes what she started, who sleeps in her bed, who raises her child as a memorial to what you lost. If that's what you want, you married the wrong person. That's not what I want. Then what do you want? The question hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Zeke moved into the room, sat heavily on the edge of the bed where his first wife had once slept. I want to stop seeing her face when I look at you. I want to stop hearing her voice when you speak. I want to love you for who you are, not who you remind me of, but you don't know how. No, I don't. Serafina felt something break inside. Her chest. Not her heart exactly, but the hope she'd been building without permission. The dream of becoming more than a convenient arrangement, more than a tool for justice. Where does that leave us? I don't know that either. Outside, Meadowlark called for them to come see the baby rabbits in the hutch. Life continuing its rhythm despite the adult complications that threaten to tear their careful equilibrium apart. She thinks I'm her mama now. Zeke's hands clenched into fists on his knees. She lost Margaret when she was 5. Hardly remembers her anymore, just fragments and impressions. You're the closest thing to a mother she's had since then. And if I leave, she loses another mother. The weight of it settled on Seraphine's shoulders. A child's heart balanced against her own. Need for authentic love, genuine partnership instead of shadowed substitution. I could go to Samuel's place. Help other women escape the network, continue the fight from there. You could, no argument. No plea for her to stay. Just acknowledgement that she had the right to choose her own path, even if that path led away from him and the child she'd grown to love. But you'd rather I stayed. For Meadowlark, yes. For the investigation, yes. For me, he paused, struggled with words that seemed to stick in his throat. I don't know what I want for me anymore. Serafina moved to the chair by the window, settling herself with the careful control she'd learned during her years with Wade. Survival meant managing emotion, channeling it into useful action instead of destructive feeling. Tell me about her. Really tell me, not just the investigation parts. What was she like? Zeke's surprise showed on his face. He'd expected anger, perhaps, ultimatums, not curiosity about the woman whose shadow fell across their marriage. She laughed at inappropriate moments. During sermons, at town meetings when pompous men made pompous speeches. She couldn't help herself. A smile ghosted across his features. She made excellent bread, but terrible coffee. She sang off-key but didn't care. She read everything she could get her hands on and remembered all of it. What else? She was fearless in ways that sometimes scared me. She'd walk up to dangerous men and charm information out of them without seeming to try. She made friends with women other people dismissed or ignored. She saw injustice and couldn't let it stand. The description painted a picture of someone Serafina might have liked, might have learned from. A woman of substance and courage who died trying to make the world safer for others. She sounds remarkable. She was. I'm not her. No, you're not. I'm harder than she was, less trusting. I don't charm information from dangerous men, I take it. I don't make friends easily because friendship has been a luxury I couldn't afford. I see injustice and I survive it first, fight it second. Zeke studied her face in the golden afternoon light. You're also braver than she was in some ways. She chose to fight. You were forced into it and kept fighting anyway. Different kinds of strength. Yes. Meadowlark's voice carried through the cabin again, more insistent now. Soon she would come looking for them, full of questions about baby rabbits and ribbon placement and whether they could have cake with dinner. I need to know. Something, Serafina said. When you look at me now today, in this moment, do you see me? Or do you see the woman you wish she could have been? Zeke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute honesty. Both. I see both, and I hate myself for it. The admission settled between them like dust after a storm. Painful but clean in its clarity. Then we know where we stand. Do we? Serafina rose from the chair, smoothed her skirts. Prepared to face Meadowlark's excited chatter and evening routine, as if her world hadn't shifted beneath her feet. We're partners in an investigation. We're parents to a child who needs stability. We're two people trying to do right in a world that makes righteousness difficult. She paused in the doorway. But we're not husband and wife. Not really. Not. Until you can love me without apologizing to her memory for it. She left him sitting on the bed with his ghosts and his guilt, the afternoon light fading around him like hope deferred. That evening, they maintained their routine. Dinner, dishes, Meadowlark's bath, and bedtime story. But something had changed in the space between them. A recognition of limits, of boundaries that couldn't be crossed until old wounds finished healing. It wasn't love, but it wasn't convenient fiction anymore either. It was honest partnership between two damaged people trying to build something worthwhile, from the fragments of their separate lives. For now, it would have to be enough. Magnus Webb arrived in Copper Ridge like winter returning to the mountains, sudden and merciless. His entourage filled the main street. 6 riders in dark coats, their horses breathing steam in the morning chill. They moved with the precision of men accustomed to violence, their eyes cataloging escape routes and potential threats with professional efficiency. Webb himself dismounted with the casual authority of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Tall, silver-haired, wearing wealth in the cut of his clothes and the quality of his leather. He spoke quietly to the sheriff, words too low to carry, but intent clear enough. They wanted Serafina. Dr. Helena Morse brought the news, arriving at the cabin breathless from her hard ride up the mountain. Her medical bag bounced against her horse's flank as she pulled up in their yard. They're offering a substantial reward for information about your whereabouts, she said without preamble, claiming you're a runaway who stole valuables when you left Webb's employment. Serafina felt the familiar chill of hunted prey. She had known this moment would come, but knowing and experiencing were different creatures entirely. How long before someone talks? Not long. Fear and greed make poor companions for loyalty. Zeke emerged from the house, Meadowlark clinging to his leg with the instinctual awareness children develop when adult tension threatens their world. His rifle rested in the crook of his arm, a statement of intent. Samuel's place? Webb's men are watching the roads north. They know about your cousin. Dr. Morse's eyes moved between them, calculating. There's something else. Sheriff Jackson wants to meet with you. Tonight, after Webb retires to the hotel. Says it's important. Could be a trap. Could be salvation. Jackson's been asking careful questions around town. About missing women, about territorial authority, about what happens when local law enforcement gets overwhelmed by problems too big for small towns. Hope was a dangerous emotion, but Serafina felt it stir despite her better judgment. Perhaps they weren't as alone as they'd believed. That evening, Zeke left for town while Serafina remained at the cabin with Meadowlark. The child sensed the change in their routine, the way adults moved with careful precision instead of easy comfort. Are we in trouble, Mama Sierra? The name still caught Serafina off guard, still made her chest tighten with emotions she couldn't afford to examine. Meadowlark had begun using it weeks ago, casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes good people have to face difficulties because they're trying to help others. Like Papa helping you at the auction? Like that, yes. Meadowlark considered this with the seriousness children bring to adult explanations that don't quite make sense but feel important. Will you stay with us even if there's trouble? The question pierced deeper than Serafina expected. A child's need for security colliding with the reality of adult complications. The possibility that love and protection might not be enough to keep families together. I'll stay as long as I can. It was the only honest answer she could give. Zeke returned near midnight, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Meadowlark had fallen asleep in Seraphine's lap while they waited, her small body warm and trusting against the uncertainty of the night. Jackson's working with Territorial. Marshall's has been for months. Serafina felt the ground shift beneath her understanding of recent events. The auction? Part of a larger operation. They needed Webb to make a move, to expose himself and his network. You were the bait, though. Jackson says they didn't plan it that way. How comforting. He wants to bring Webb down, but he needs our evidence. What you remember, what Margaret documented, combined with what the marshals have gathered. Enough to make charges stick in. Territorial court. And if we refuse, then other women stay trapped. The network continues operating. Webb finds another way to make us disappear. Serafina shifted Meadowlark's sleeping weight, considering their options. All paths led through danger, but some offered the possibility of justice at the end. What? Does Jackson propose? We meet with the Territorial Marshals tomorrow night, hand over everything we have. In exchange, they guarantee our protection and Webb's prosecution. You trust him? Zeke was quiet for a long moment, staring into the dying fire. I trust that he wants Webb caught as much as we do. His reasons might be different, but his goal is the same. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Documents gathered, maps copied. Seraphine's memories organized into a coherent narrative that could withstand legal scrutiny. By dawn, they had assembled enough evidence to hang a dozen men. But as morning light crept through the windows, revealing the scope of their investigation spread across the kitchen table, Serafina realized something that made her blood run cold. We're missing something. Zeke looked up from the document he was reviewing. What? Webb's financial records. I kept track of payments to local officials, but never the larger financial structure. How money moved between territories, who provided the initial funding, where profits went. Wade would have kept those records separate. Yes, but Webb would have copies. Has to for his own protection. Serafina felt pieces clicking together in her mind. That's why he came himself. Not just to retrieve me, but to secure whatever Wade might have left behind. Where would Wade hide financial documents? Somewhere secure but accessible. Somewhere he could reach them quickly if he needed to run. Serafina closed her eyes, thinking back to her time as Wade's unwilling assistant. The bank. Cornelius Wade had a safety deposit box at the Copper Ridge Bank. Jackson needs to know. But as Zeke reached for his coat, the sound of approaching horses froze them both. Multiple riders moving fast up the mountain road. Too early. For friendly visitors, too many for casual travelers. Serafina gathered Meadowlark from her bed, the child waking with the confused compliance of someone roused from deep sleep. Through the window, she could see dust rising from the valley below. 6 riders, maybe 7, pushing their horses hard. The root cellar, Zeke said, already moving toward the kitchen. He pulled up the trapdoor, revealing the space they'd prepared for this possibility. Stay quiet no matter what you hear. Serafina descended into darkness with Meadowlark in her arms, pulling the door closed above them. Through the floorboards, she could hear Zeke moving around the cabin, hiding evidence, preparing for whatever was coming. The riders arrived with the thunder of hooves and the jingle of spurs. Serafina pressed her hand over Meadowlark's mouth, feeling the child's frightened breathing against her palm. Voices above them. Webb's cultured tones, Zeke's careful responses. Questions about a missing woman, suggestions about cooperation, offers that sounded generous but carried threats in their undertones. We know she's here, Thornfield. Better to hand her over willingly than make this difficult. Don't know what you're talking about. Come now. We're reasonable men. The woman stole valuable items when she left my employ. I simply want my property returned. Property. The words sent rage through Seraphine's chest, but she forced herself to remain still. Meadowlark's safety depended on silence. Search if you want. You won't find anything that doesn't belong here. Footsteps above them. Furniture moved, doors opened and closed. The methodical sounds of men who knew how to conduct a thorough search. Time stretched like pulled wire. Meadowlark's small body grew heavy against Seraphine's chest, but she didn't dare shift position. Every creak of the floorboards above might be discovery, capture, the end of everything they'd worked toward. Finally, voices retreating. Webb's parting words carried clearly through the boards. If you change your mind about cooperation, I'll be at the hotel until tomorrow evening. After that, well, I'm afraid my patience runs thin. The sound of horses departing. Silence settling over the cabin like dust after a storm. Seraphina waited, counted her heartbeats, listened for any sign that someone had remained behind. When Zeke finally opened the trap door, daylight flooded their hiding place. His face was grim but determined. They're gone for now. Seraphina climbed out with Meadowlark, her legs shaking from the cramped position and the aftermath of fear. The child was fully awake now, eyes wide with questions she was too frightened to ask. Tonight, Zeke said. We meet with Jackson and the marshals tonight. This ends one way or another. Seraphina nodded, understanding the weight of what he wasn't saying. Tomorrow would bring resolution or disaster, justice or tragedy. The life they'd built together or the destruction of everything they'd tried to protect. But as she looked at Meadowlark's trusting face, at Zeke's determined expression, she realized something had crystallized during their hours in the darkness below. They were no longer just partners in an investigation. They were a family, flawed and complicated and built on unconventional foundations, but a family nonetheless. And families protected each other, no matter the cost. The sun climbed toward noon, marking time until evening brought either salvation or reckoning. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, witnesses to human struggles that played out in their shadows. But inside the cabin, 3 people prepared to fight for their right to remain together, to build something good from the wreckage of their separate pasts. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. The confrontation began not with gunfire but with ledger books spread across Sheriff Jackson's desk. Marshal Thomas Brennan studied the documents Seraphina had memorized, his weathered fingers tracing routes and payments while his deputy made careful notes. Jackson stood by the window, watching the street for any sign of Webb's men. This is extensive, Brennan said finally. More comprehensive than anything we've assembled on our own. Seraphina sat between Zeke and Dr. Morse, Meadowlark sleeping against her shoulder despite the late hour. The child had refused to be left behind, clinging to Seraphina with the desperate need of someone who understood that families could disappear without warning. The financial records are the key, Seraphina said. Wade's safety deposit box will have the proof you need to connect Webb to everything. We'll need a court order to open it, which takes time we don't have, Zeke added. Webb leaves tomorrow. Jackson turned from the window. There might be another way. The plan formed quickly. Dr. Morse would approach Webb at the hotel, claiming she had information about Seraphine's whereabouts in exchange for a substantial reward. While Webb was distracted, Jackson and the marshals would search his room for any documents he might have retrieved from Wade's effects. Meanwhile, Zeke and Seraphina would attempt to access Wade's safety deposit box using the key they'd found hidden in Margaret's journal. A desperate gamble that required perfect timing and considerable luck. If this goes wrong, Brennan warned, Webb will disappear and we'll lose our chance to shut down the network. If we don't try, other women stay trapped, Serafina replied. That's not acceptable. Dawn broke gray and cold over Copper Ridge. As they implemented their plan, Dr. Morse entered the hotel with the measured confidence of someone carrying valuable information. Jackson and the marshals positioned themselves for quick action. Serafina and Zeke approached the bank through the alley, avoiding the main street where Webb's men might spot them. Meadowlark stayed with Samuel's wife at the boarding house. Her separation from them, a physical ache neither adult acknowledged. The bank manager, roused from his morning routine, examined Wade's key with suspicious eyes. This is highly irregular. Without proper documentation of death and inheritance. Wade died intestate, Zeke said, producing his territorial investigator credentials. This is official business related to his estate. Reluctantly, the manager led them to the vault. The safety deposit box contained exactly what Serafina had hoped. Financial records, correspondence, contracts that laid bare the entire trafficking network structure and funding. Webb's signature appeared on dozens of documents. They photographed what they could, copied what they must, their hands working with desperate efficiency. Outside, church bells marked the passing hours. Soon Webb would discover Dr. Morse's deception, would realize he'd been maneuvered into position. Got it, Zeke said, closing the box. Enough to hang him and half the territory's corrupt officials. They emerged from the bank to find the street unusually quiet. Too quiet. Webb's men were gone from their usual positions, and even the normal morning bustle seemed muted. Dr. Morse met them at the boarding house, her face pale but determined. He knows, she said without preamble. Figured out I was lying within minutes. But Jackson found what he was looking for in Webb's room. Correspondence. With buyers, schedules for future transfers, a list of officials on his payroll. Where is he now? Webb? Gathering his men. He knows you have evidence that can destroy him. The final confrontation came not in the street, but in the courthouse, where Marshal Brennan had assembled a territorial court session with Judge Morrison presiding. Webb arrived under guard, his silver hair disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled from a night in jail. The evidence mounted methodically. Seraphine's testimony, supported by Wade's financial records. Margaret's journal, corroborated by the documents found in Webb's possession. Statements from Dr. Morse about the women she'd treated after escaping the network. Webb's lawyer objected, argued, claimed the evidence was circumstantial or illegally obtained. But the pattern was too clear. The documentation too extensive. The court finds sufficient evidence to bind the defendant over for trial on charges of human trafficking, conspiracy, and accessory to murder, Judge Morrison announced. Webb's composed facade cracked for the first time. His eyes found Seraphine's. Across the courtroom, carrying the promise of future retribution that made her blood chill. But his threats carried no power now. His network was exposed, his financial backers fleeing, his protection evaporating under the light of public scrutiny. Justice moved slowly but inexorably forward. 6 months later, autumn painted the mountain valley in shades of gold and crimson. Webb's trial had ended with conviction on all charges. His associates faced their own reckonings as territorial authorities dismantled the trafficking network piece by piece. The women they'd rescued were healing, some reunited with families, others beginning new lives with fresh identities and hope for better futures. Serafina stood in her garden, harvesting the last tomatoes before the first frost. The plants had grown strong over the summer, their roots deep in mountain soil that had seemed too harsh to nurture anything tender. Meadowlark ran between the rows, gathering squash in her small arms, chattering about the harvest feast they would prepare. At 9 now, she moved with the confidence of a child who knew herself loved and protected. "Mama Sira, look how big this one is." The title no longer felt foreign. Somewhere between the courthouse testimony and the quiet evenings that followed, Serafina had stopped being a replacement and become simply herself. Meadowlark's mother by choice rather than circumstance. Zeke emerged from the cabin carrying his carpentry tools. He'd been building new furniture, pieces designed for their specific family rather than general function. A dining table large enough for guests, bookshelves to hold Seraphine's growing collection, a toy chest carved with rabbits for Meadowlark. "Ready?" he asked. Serafina nodded, wiping dirt from her hands. Today marked a year since the auction that had brought them together. They decided to make it a celebration rather than a commemoration of trauma. But first, there was something that needed saying. She found him by the creek where he'd been chopping wood for winter. The pile grew larger each day as he prepared for the cold months ahead, providing for his family with the methodical care that characterized everything he did. "I need to know something," she said. Zeke straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What's that?" "When you look at me now, what do you see?" The question that had haunted their marriage for months. The ghost that had stood between them. Even as they worked together, fought together, built a life together. He set down the axe, turned to face her fully. "I see the woman who saved my daughter from nightmares by teaching her that strength comes in different forms. I see the partner who helped me finish Margaret's work and find peace with her memory. I see someone who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. And I see the woman I love. Not because she reminds me of someone else, but because of who she is, who she chose to become." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything they'd built on careful friendship and mutual respect. "Are you certain?" "I've been certain for months. I was just afraid to say it." Serafina felt something loosen in her chest. The careful guard she'd maintained, the readiness to leave if love proved to be memorial rather than genuine feeling. "I love you too," she said. "Not the man who saved me from the auction block, but the one who reads bedtime stories with different voices for every character. The one who builds furniture designed to last generations. The one who still talks to his first wife sometimes when he thinks no one is listening, and finds peace in those conversations instead of pain." They stood by the creek in the afternoon light, water moving over stone with the eternal patience of mountain streams. Two damaged people who had found healing in unexpected partnership, love in the spaces between survival and hope. That evening, they held their celebration. Dr. Morse came, and Samuel with his family, and even Sheriff Jackson, who had become an unlikely friend. They ate Seraphine's cooking, and Zeke's home-brewed cider, told stories and shared laughter that echoed off the cabin walls. Later, after the guests had departed, and Meadowlark had fallen asleep surrounded by presents, Serafina and Zeke sat by their fire. Not the careful distance of convenient marriage, but the comfortable closeness of people who had chosen each other again and again until choice became truth. "No regrets?" he asked. Serafina considered the question, thinking back to the auction block, the months of uncertainty, the revelations that had nearly torn them apart. "Only that it took us so long to get here." Outside, wind moved through the pines with the sound of winter approaching. But inside their cabin, warmth held court. The fire burned bright, casting dancing shadows on walls that sheltered a family. Forged by circumstance but sustained by love. They had built something good from the fragments of their separate tragedies. Something that would last through whatever trials the future might bring. And in the morning, they would wake to another day of tending their garden, raising their daughter, and proving that love grown slowly in difficult soil often proves the strongest kind of all. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.